everyone, this is Sally with the Polka Dot Life. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. Recently, I had the opportunity to attend Stampin' Up's annual convention, and we call it OnStage. This year, it was held in Long Beach, California, and it was so beautiful. We just enjoyed the wonderful weather that we had while we were out there, too. My husband went along with me. And our convention is just such a fun time. It's a special time because we get to spend time with our friends and fellow demonstrators that we don't get to see in person very often. Sometimes we go a whole year and only see each other virtually on meetings and, chatting and that kind of thing. But this time, this is time we get to be together, and it is just a really, really fun time. We get to see new products that Stampin' Up will be releasing soon. They give us some special trainings, and we also, something that we do there is we swap cards. And there are a couple different kinds of card swaps. There can be some that are organized and they have parameters that you need to follow. And other times it's just general swapping. And you just make the card using current products, and you swap. You just go around and say, hey, are you swapping? And, meet in the aisles, meet in the lobby, whatnot. And you get to meet a lot of really, really nice people that way. So sometimes, like I say, there is a parameter involved in an organized swap, like it has to have layers and an embellishment and a die cut and whatnot. But I did the one that was just general. I did not sign up for one just because I didn't want to have something else on my calendar. I wanted to keep it a little bit open. And it's just a good time during those downtimes, during the breaks in the convention itself, that you can do the swapping, or before they start for the day. I made 50 cards. That's what I chose to make. There's no set number. It's just how many you want to make and how much work that you wanted to do. But I wanted to share with you a special story too. During one of the breakout sessions for training, this lovely woman just kind of bebopped in beside me and sat down and said, hey, how are you? And I looked and I said, oh, hi, good morning. And then I took a double take and realized it was Shelley Gardner, the founder of Stampin' Up. She founded the company. It will soon, I think in 27 or 28, it will be 40 years since she founded the company. And not only did she sit beside me, but she was my brainstorming partner during that breakout session. And that was the highlight of my whole onstage experience, because she was just one of the girls. She just was so wonderful and kind and down to earth. I enjoyed it. So let's get on to making our cards. I didn't start early enough deciding to film to cut out all of the papers and do all of the die cutting, but I did pick it up whenever I just didn't have enough dies. I should have had more than one die set probably if I was going to do this much die cutting, but I just did them singly. With one die set, and so I had to run some things through multiple times, and so I just picked up at where I was in the process with filming. You want to have a design that's nice, but something that you can mass produce. I'm going to admit that mine was a pretty involved swap card, but it was what made my heart happy, and that's what I did. You can see here that it's just an involved process when you have to do die cutting for that many things and that many intricate things. I did find sometimes that, especially those little flower dies would hang in there a little bit, that if I went ahead and put some wax paper down and put my paper down and put wax paper down just to give it a little thickness on a scrap piece of paper, and then run those dies through so that wax paper kind of put a little coating on the inside of the dies, that it made it easier to release. So every once in a while I would have to slow down and do that just to keep those little flowers coming out easily. But then you can see after I die cut them there were two pieces on that die, and I wanted the larger flower but not the smaller one. So I have a bunch of smaller yellow flowers tucked away to use for another project. I figured they would make a nice shaker card or just some other thing that I needed a lot of one color flower for. But actually, I have three colors that are like that. And you will notice that I'm just trying to put my like things together. That just is a little happier. When I cut the paper to for the die cuts so they'd be just the right size, I figured out how many pieces I could get out of a sheet of paper and what size I would need, that kind of thing. And then I cut those ahead of time and counted those out. I just kind of picked, I think I started with 45, and so I ended up at 50 though. So you'll notice that at the end, I think I had to cut a few more things, but it just helps to keep things in like types of pieces for now. So I decided to go ahead and glue the spade, I guess is what you would call it, your little hand shovel, and put the stamped handles on them. And so I decided to do that first, that it was just kind of one less small piece that I had to keep track of. And I went and did those. I really like this set, how the handle is floral. It just is so pretty. And I used Timid Tiger for the orange portion, and I believe it was Garden Green then, I used for the one type of leaf and then the leaves that were stamped on that handle. So you will see then that I take those small little flowers and I just decided that they needed some definition. They were pretty the way they were, but it was going to look unfinished if I didn't do this very simple step. And I think we forget that sometimes it's just those little tiny details that make your card go from this is really nice to wow. And this is one of them. I took my Stampin' Blend and just did dots on the insides of those little flowers. I used the Timid Tiger Stampin' Blend on the Timid Tiger paper. Now I wanted to point out that while this is about a 30-ish minute video, that this took days and hours to complete. I admit that I am a little bit of a slower stamper as it is, but I just enjoy the process, so I slow down and enjoy it. But it was a lot of die cutting, and I don't even know how many hours long of video that I have. Probably about 7 hours of video that I have, and I didn't film the most labor intensive part, which was the cutting of the majority of those die cuts. So that was a lot of paper cutting and then a lot of die cutting. You'll see that on the Darling Duckling paper that I have used the Blackberry Bliss blend marker to put the centers in those. So back to what I was saying, I sped this video up, sliced a lot out. I just wanted to give you an overview. A lot of people have never done swap cards, so they just don't know the process. And you have to figure out your process. Your process may look very different than mine. I may touch my paper a little bit more than people would want. I just try to batch it into steps. That's the easiest way my mind can handle it. So that's what I do. But you may want to complete a whole card at a time. You just do whatever makes you happy and enjoy the process. Now here I took my white gel pen and I used that on the Blackberry Bliss flowers. And you had to be a little bit careful because if you've ever worked with a gel pen before, they're not bad and they're not messy, but they do take a little time to dry. So I had to be careful not to touch those. Next, I had my layers cut for my emboss layer, and I am just running that through my die cutting machine and getting that part all done. And I can't remember the name of it exactly. I think it's something designs. I did know it at one point, but I can't remember now. Now, I do not have Stampin' Up's new Stampin' Positioner, So I have my old Stamparatus, and this is how I like to do something that has to be stamped over and over again, and it's a die cut. So what I did was I took a scrap piece of paper, I think that was Tranquil Tide that I had in my stash, and I just made a little holder for all of my die cuts. And so I cut one in there, and then I put the stamp in it and closed the lid. And so that way I know that my stamp is in the right place. You may have to tweak it just slightly. So allow yourself a couple practice ones. But then I use the pecan pie paper and the pecan pie ink, and I believe this, you probably just caught a view of me. Sometimes it was late at night, sometimes it was early in the morning. I was probably in my pajamas here, stamping and making my swap cards, getting ready to go to California. But when you're doing a swap, sometimes that's just how you have to do it. You have to do it while you have a little moment or a little pocket of time, and that's just how that worked out for me. I used my large ink pad. I have my small Stampin' Spot there that you will see. Some people prefer to use the Stampin' Spot on there. They say it just works better with your stamp positioning tools to do that. Mine just happened to be really juicy, I think, is what the problem with mine was. You'll see that I'm trying it, but it just came out a little darker than I want, and it's just a different surface too. So there's that. It's just personal preference. I don't mind using the big one. It gets a little messy, but you just take your Simply Chamois and wipe off your plate, every once in a while, and then when you're done, I just take mine to the sink and run clear water over it, and it just cleans everything super well. On occasion, I had to get out my tools to get that paper back out of there. Sometimes it just got really embedded in that little groove. But you'll see that it's just a process, and you just have to go on. I didn't really need these pots to be perfectly stamped, so they were off maybe just a tinge, but I knew I was covering up the top of that and a large portion of the bottom of it. It was really just the left hand side that showed a lot. So I went through and did all of my stamping, and that just took a little bit of time. Next, I got out my cutting mat. This is not a Stampin' Up product. It was just one that I had from sewing, I believe. And so I used the Take Your Pick tool. It has a really nice, like an X-Acto type knife end on it. I don't really know what we call it, but it's a blade end. And I just took that little tool and made like a smile type cut there on the one rim along there, that rimmed part of the pot, because I knew I had to make my little bouquet of plants and flowers that would slide down in there. And so that was just the most natural way I could think to make that happen. So I just had to spend some time experimenting with what I liked, of how things went together there. I used 2 of the old olive sprigs and 1 of the garden green on each planter that I was building. And I liked them kind of, I liked that garden green piece kind of sandwiched in the middle, if you will. Then I went ahead and put those in, and I put dimensionals on the back to hold those greenery pieces in place. Now this one I'm just kind of figuring out how I want things to go, and it just takes a couple until you see what's going to work for your process, what you like. I knew that I didn't want to put dimensionals out on the edges of that pot, because I knew that I was going to be sliding something in under that towards the end of the process. So I just tried to keep those top edges, especially of the planter, available to slide some things under them. Now the shovel, or the hand shovel, or the spade, I'm not exactly sure what that's called. I did put a dimensional on the handle, and I started out with putting a dimensional on the one side of it, but sometimes that just didn't line up right. They just are not all going to be the same, even though we technically are quote unquote mass producing these. They are handmade, and so there's going to be variation in them. And so you'll see then later I kind of went back and checked to see how they were all seated on there. But I just took a long time, and it took a long time to put those green pieces together, because I kind of weaved them in and out of each other, and that just took a little bit of time. And I think I was going back to check. Sometimes I felt like the tops of those planters were a little loosey-goosey. I had used the dimensionals on the pot, but on the plants themselves, they were still a little bit loose. And when you're going to, especially on stage, things like that, people are flying in from everywhere or driving, but these are going to have to go in a suitcase somewhere along the way, a carry-on or a checked bag. And so they're just handled a lot in and out of the bag and whatnot. So you want to make sure that things are not going to come undone, and that's what I did here. And next up, it was time for our greeting, and I chose to stamp that in the Blackberry Bliss. I love Blackberry Bliss. I don't use it very often. It's one of those inks that I love, but yet it can get kind of messy if you're not really careful with it. And so I had those lemon lolly strips that I went ahead and stamped on, and I wanted to leave a little space on the left-hand side for a border. And so I just left a little space there, but they're pretty centered, but not necessarily exactly centered, because we are going to go in and flag the ends of that banner. So I could have set this up on a Stamparatus as well. I just felt that until I got it set up, I could just hand stamp them and be done with it. So I think I only had to flip one over. I got really, really lucky. So that was a good stamping day for me. Do you ever have those kind of days where it doesn't matter how much you try to do it, you can't get it straight? But this actually was a good day for me, getting things on and getting them straight. So we just continue on with that repeating process of stamping the greeting that says "Love You Bunches." And then you do, especially after you use like Night of Navy or Blackberry Bliss, you want to clean your surface. And even if you don't, you want to clean it every now and again. I have my glass mat, so I just am getting out a baby wipe to wipe it off, because you've got adhesive, you've got inks, you've just got all kinds of things, just your oil from your hands, all of those things. You want, when you do a swap card, one of the very most important things you can do is do your best work. There is nothing more disappointing than getting a card from someone that just had no regard. They didn't care. They were just out to collect nice cards for themselves. And that doesn't happen very often. I will say that. That does not happen especially at OnStage. OnStage is kind of a whole nother level. But sometimes just if you're doing a group swap, sometimes it just happens that way. But I try to always do my very best work. I think that's a good rule for life. That, I mean, sometimes you can do good enough is good enough, but if you have the choice, I think it's always a great choice to do your very best work, whether someone's watching or whether they aren't. So now I'm just taking my snips, and I am just flagging the ends of these banners. And again, that's just one of those things. It's not hard to do. It just takes a minute. You just cut a little slit up the center, and then you line up your snips with the corners, and you just cut into that line that you snipped in the center, and that way it keeps it pretty even. It's just a good fast way to do that. Now, if you really didn't want to do that, if you had a punch of some sort, you could punch those, or a die cut, you could die cut your banners, whatever makes you happy and that you enjoy. We did find out that we are going to be getting snips back in the line in a different form. The previous manufacturer went out of business, I believe, and so we don't currently have snips in our offering. We don't know the timeline, but it is coming, so I'm glad about that. And then I'm just taking each one of those banners and adding some liquid adhesive to it. I think that the liquid adhesive is the very best when you are adding something to an embossed layer. Now, that embossed layer, I did not pop up on dimensionals. I just kept it flat for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's faster. Let's just be real honest. The glue also gets into the embossed layer and it holds it better. So whether you're gluing it on the back side or the front side, adhesive, liquid adhesive is always good when you're working with an embossed layer. And the other thing is I knew I wanted those elements on the top to be popped up with some dimension, and I didn't want to double do it when people are packing their bags and trying to get these back home. I used an empty paper pumpkin box. Is at the end, after I get these all individually packaged, then I used some empty paper pumpkin boxes to transport my cards to OnStage, and then I actually put them in my carry-on because they're like your children when you've spent this much time on it, that you want them to arrive safely. But then after I swapped my cards, then I put my cards that people gave to me, which I will do a video on that too, but I put those back into those paper pumpkin boxes to get them back home safely. And I actually even had a like a gallon size Ziploc bag that those paper pumpkin boxes, it's a tight fit, but you can get them in there just because they did come home in my checked luggage, and you never know if I do have hard side luggage, but if they sit on a tarmac somewhere in the rain or whatnot, I would be very, very sad if my swap cards got all wet. So now I am taking some linen thread and I'm cutting, I think, about 13 inches. It goes just kind of that measurement that went right across the top or front of that glass mat. And rather than cut individuals, I just kind of measured out once and made that loop around my finger, brought it down and just looped it around a few times and then cut the ends so that I could get larger amount of string without so many cuts and so many measurements. Then I figured out finally that I grouped them in a certain number, I think 10 or whatever, and laid on top there so that I knew how many I had. Sometimes with linen thread, it gets a little squirrely and you have to smooth it out and let that warmth of your hand and the tension of you pulling it and running your finger across it to get it to where it's not quite as unruly. I like a little bend left in it, but sometimes it's just very much like a corkscrew and you just have to smooth it out. So I did run out of linen thread and had to pull in some of the crumb cake color from our twine that we have in the essential twine pack, or I forget what that's called too, but I did have to do a few, and I used those, I think, for the last probably 5 or 6 that I needed to cut for. Like I say, it's just a process. You just have to find what works for you. Try to build like tasks together, I think, is a great one. And you'll notice too that I chose not to use any designer series paper on my card because sometimes it just doesn't go as far as you think it's going to go, and maybe you didn't order enough and you can't really swap one. If you're doing some organized swaps, they have to be exactly the same. So you would have to order multiple packs of designer series paper just to get enough sheets of one print. And so I just decided that sticking with cardstock was a good option for me. And I like that because it reminds us, I always love my designer series paper, but it reminds us to go back that we really don't need everything to make a pretty card. Now you'll see here I use a bow maker, a little tool that helps me, and I'm just going through now and tying each one of those bows. Another trick that I have for working on something that is a big project this way is it is my guilty pleasure time to watch TV. So let's see, I watched a lot of Grace and Frankie. I watched Chicago Fires. Might have had something else on Netflix. Friends is always my go to. And so a lot of those different shows were watched. They were shows that I didn't need to pay a super amount of attention to because most of them I've seen before. But it was just one of those that kept the day happy for me, made it enjoyable, doing some work, but still getting a little pleasure. So I took each one of those bows and I put them onto a strip of the glue dots because that just kind of keeps them a little less unruly. And then I can just pull them off and I just lifted up the corner edge, that left corner edge of the top of the pot, and I slid it under there. And then you'll see this is where I went through with the glue dots and just adhered the bottom of that little hand shovel down to the bottom of the pot. It didn't really need, for most of them, they didn't need another dimensional down there. They just needed adhered so they wouldn't get torn off of the card. So you'll see that I'm just going through and giving it a little check to make sure that everything was secured down the way I felt that it should be. And I did end up using 2 colors of cardstocks for my card base. I thought that I had a lot of garden green and it turned out I didn't. So it actually, for a general swap, it works really well because then you can say, would you like a timid tiger or would you like a garden green card? And it's funny because I really felt most people would pick the green card, but a lot of people really, really wanted that timid tiger orange. So you just don't know what people's preference is sometimes. It's just kind of fun. It's one of those experiences. It's like, oh, I just didn't think about that. And so it just shows that, um, we just all have our own styles and things that we like. So here I cut those layers for the inside of the card, and then I have our medium clear envelopes. These are a little hidden gem with Stampin' Up. I know some people say I can get them on Amazon a whole lot cheaper. Yes, you can, and yes, they look like it. I'm going to flat out say that. These are really nice quality. Now, some people I like to seal them, but some people don't. Here I also slid one of my business cards down in the back so that people would know, and it's always appreciated when you do that so that you can see who you swapped a card with. You can say, oh, do they have a YouTube channel? Can I follow them? Can I watch them and get ideas, even more ideas from them? So, but I like to pull that seal on that and make them nice and secure. I hope you enjoyed following along to see how I made my swap cards for the 2026 OnStage in Long Beach, California. If you happen to get one of my cards, leave me a comment and tell me. I'd love to hear that from you. So enjoy your day, enjoy your crafting. Remember to be kind, send a card, and do something creative. Bye-bye.